The sound of footsteps from the neighbor upstairs, an unfamiliar noise in the hallway. 99% of the time, it's nothing. But for the people you're about to hear from, it was the start of a nightmare. These are 5 true, terrifying apartment horror stories that will make you think twice about who or what is living next door. This first story was submitted by a man named Leo, who learned the hard way that some stains are impossible to get out. For Leo, moving into his first solo apartment was supposed to be a huge milestone. It was a top-floor unit in an older but well-kept 3-story building. The rent was decent, and the place had character hardwood floors, a clawfoot tub. You get the picture. For the first few weeks, it was perfect. He loved the quiet, the privacy, the feeling of having a space that was all his. The building was mostly older tenants and young professionals, none of whom he ever really saw or heard. At first, the silence was a comfort. The problem started small. It began with a faint, musty smell in the corner of his living room. He'd just bought a big, second-hand ficus tree and figured it was just the potting soil. He tried opening windows, lighting incense, but the smell wouldn't leave. It was a heavy, sweetish scent that seemed to get thicker when the apartment got warm. After a week, he noticed a small, discolored spot on the ceiling right above where the smell was strongest. It was barely the size of a quarter, a faint brownish-yellow stain against the white paint. He figured it was an old water stain, totally normal for a building this age. He made a mental note to tell the landlord, but he forgot. Over the next few days, the stain grew. It spread slowly, its edges darkening from tan to a deep, unsettling brown. The smell got stronger as it grew, becoming richer, more organic. It wasn't just musty anymore. It had an undertone that reminded him of old pennies and a butcher shop. It clung to his furniture, his clothes. One night, while he was watching a movie, he heard a sound, a soft, wet drip. He looked up. A single, dark drop of liquid was hanging from the center of the stain. It was thick, almost black, and it glistened in the light from the TV. As he watched, it trembled, and then it fell, landing without a sound on his hardwood floor. He just stared at the spot on the floor, a dark circle that looked like a drop of molasses. He grabbed a paper towel to wipe it up, but the second he touched it, he pulled his hand back. The liquid was thick and sticky, and it had a warmth to it that felt deeply wrong. The smell was overpowering now, a coppery, sick sweetness that made his stomach churn. He immediately called his landlord, an older guy named Mr. Corbin, who sounded pretty annoyed to be getting a call so late. Leo explained everything. The smell, the growing stain, the dripping. Mr. Corbin promised he'd come by in the morning. That night, Leo couldn't sleep. He shut the living room door and stuffed a towel under it, but he swore the smell was seeping through the walls. The dripping got more frequent. Drip, drip, drip. A slow, maddening rhythm in the otherwise dead silent apartment. He just lay there, imagining the stain spreading above him like a dark, horrible flower on his ceiling. The next morning, Leo waited and waited. By 10, Mr. Corbin still wasn't there. The stain had almost doubled in size overnight. It was now an mottled patch over a foot wide, and it wasn't just dripping anymore. A slow, steady ooze had started, a syrupy, dark red substance leaking from different spots, forming thick, heavy drops that splattered on the plastic sheet he'd put down. Disgusted, and fed up, Leo decided to investigate himself. The apartment right above him was 3B. He'd never met the tenant, but he remembered Mr. Corbin saying it was a reclusive woman who had lived there for years. He took the stairs to the third floor. The hallway was silent, as always. He stood in front of door 3B and knocked. Hello. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Hello, is anyone in there? This is Leo from 2B downstairs. The only response was the faint hum of a refrigerator. A cold dread started to creep up his spine. Taped to the door was a small, faded, handwritten note. Please leave all deliveries. Here, do not knock. He pressed his ear to the door. No TV, no radio, no footsteps. But he could smell it. That same sweet, rotten odor, but 100 times stronger, seeping through the cracks around the door. It was so strong it made him dizzy. He backed away, hand over his mouth, and pulled out his phone. This time, he didn't call the landlord. He called 911. When the police arrived, their whole attitude changed the moment they hit the third floor landing. They smelled it, too, after knocking loudly and getting no answer. They announced themselves and forced the door open. The smell that rolled out into the hallway was indescribable. It was like a physical wave that sent Leo stumbling back, gagging. Even the hardened officers flinched. One went in, came right back out, and started speaking quietly but urgently into his radio. Leo never saw what was inside apartment 3B, and for that, he was grateful. He was told later, in blunt, professional terms, that the tenant had passed away several weeks ago. She had no family, no one to check on her. In the summer heat, her body had decomposed. That dark liquid that had been dripping through his ceiling was the product of that natural and horrific process. The apartment was declared a biohazard. Cleanup crews in full hazmat suits spent days in the building. Leo had to stay in a hotel. His apartment was eventually professionally cleaned, but it was never the same. They replaced the ceiling, the floorboards, repainted everything, scrubbed the place down. But he swore the smell never really left. It was in the walls, in the wood, a ghost of a scent that would hit him on warm, humid nights. He'd find himself staring at the new, clean ceiling, his mind replaying the slow, thick drip of that dark, warm liquid. He broke his lease 2 weeks later and didn't even care about losing his security deposit. He couldn't shake the feeling he was living in a tomb, and that the silence of the building wasn't a comfort anymore. It was a warning. This next story comes from a Reddit user who discovered that the scariest threats don't always come from outside. For a student named Chloe, the small, off-campus apartment was a dream come true. It was old, the heating was finicky, but it was close to the university, and, most importantly, cheap. The building was a 6-story brick structure with a kind of rundown, Gothic charm. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, was a quiet man in his late 60s who lived on the ground floor. He seemed friendly enough, if a little weird, with a habit of jingling a massive ring of keys whenever he talked. Chloe settled in. The apartment was her sanctuary, but after a few weeks, she started noticing small, odd things. It started with her keys. She was meticulous about her routine come in, lock the door, put her keys in a little ceramic bowl. One day, she came home and her keys weren't in the bowl. They were on the kitchen counter. She figured she was just being absent-minded. A few days later, it happened again. But this time, they were on the arm of the sofa. Then, other things started feeling off. textbook she knew she left on her desk was back on the bookshelf. The thermostat, which she always kept at 68, would be turned up to 72. A window she always kept locked was suddenly unlocked. Each incident was small enough to dismiss. She told herself she was just stressed or paranoid. Who else could it be? She started to question her own mind, a feeling that left her constantly on edge. That creeping unease turned into genuine fear one evening. She had a very specific way she arranged her pillows. Every morning, 2 sleeping pillows stacked flat, 1 decorative cushion centered in front. She came home late from the library and walked into her bedroom. The decorative cushion was on the floor. Her blood ran cold. There was no way she'd done that. Someone had been in her apartment, and they had been in her bedroom. Panic set in. She checked the door, locked. The windows were all latched. Nothing was stolen, not her laptop, not the cash in her drawer. This wasn't a burglary. It was something way more sinister. The thought that someone could come and go without a trace was terrifying. It felt like they were messing with her mind. Driven by fear, Chloe bought a small motion-activated nanny cam and hid it on a bookshelf facing her front door. She felt silly setting it up, but the anxiety was becoming unbearable. For 3 days, the camera caught nothing but her own coming and going. She started to relax, thinking maybe she had imagined it all. On the 4th day, she went to class, then met friends for lunch. When she got back, the air in the apartment felt heavy. The keys were in the bowl. The thermostat was right. The pillows were in place. Everything looked normal, but she had a sinking feeling. With trembling hands, she popped the SD card out of the camera and into her laptop. She fast-forwarded through hours of her empty living room. Then, at 11:15, she saw it. The lock on her front door clicked. The knob turned slowly, silently. The door opened, and Mr. Henderson, her quiet landlord, stepped inside. He moved with a calm familiarity, like he owned the place. He closed the door gently behind him, not making a sound. He just stood in her living room for a long moment, looking around. He wasn't there to fix a leak. He was just there. Chloe watched, her heart pounding, as the man on the screen walked slowly through her apartment. He ran his hand along the back of her sofa. He picked up a framed photo of her and her parents, studying it for way too long before putting it back down, just slightly crooked. He went into her kitchen, opened her fridge, and just stared inside. Then he walked out of the camera's view towards her bedroom. He was gone for 10 minutes. Chloe's mind raced, picturing him in her most private space, touching her things, standing by her bed. When he finally reappeared, he walked back to the front door, paused, and scanned the room one last time. His eyes seemed to pass right over the hidden camera. Then, just as quietly as he'd entered, he left, locking the door behind him. Chloe felt sick. The man she made small talk with, the man who held the keys to her home, had been systematically invading her privacy. The sound of his jingling keys now had a new, horrifying meaning. How many times had he done this? How long had he been watching her, learning her schedule, enjoying his secret access to her life? She wasn't sure what to do. Nothing was stolen. Would the police even take it seriously? She felt trapped. She was a student with a lease and no money. But the thought of sleeping there another night, knowing he could just walk in, was impossible. She packed a bag and went to a friend's house. The next day, with her dad by her side, She went to the police. When the officers saw the video, their attitude changed. They went with her back to the building to confront Mr. Henderson. When he answered the door, keys jingling, he denied everything. But when they mentioned video evidence, his face went pale. They searched his office, and in a locked cabinet in the basement, they found it. It wasn't just a master key. It was a board with dozens of keys, each one meticulously labeled with apartment numbers and, chillingly, the names of the tenants. Next to some of the names, mostly of young women, were handwritten notes detailing their schedules, their majors, even what cars they drove. Mr. Henderson was arrested. It turned out Chloe wasn't his first victim. The investigation uncovered a pattern of stalking and harassment stretching back years. Chloe broke her lease and moved out that day. She never again underestimated the feeling of being watched, and she never forgot that the person who holds the keys holds all the power. If you're finding these stories as unsettling as I do, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Some apartments come with leaky faucets. This one, according to the person who submitted it, came with something else. Sarah was thrilled when she found the duplex. It was the top floor of an old Victorian house, complete with a crooked balcony and a beautiful, non-functional fireplace. The rent was a steal, which the landlord explained by saying the house had a bit of a reputation. Some folks find it a bit atmospheric, he'd said. Sarah, a self-proclaimed rationalist, wasn't scared off by ghost stories. A draft was a draft. A creak was just old wood. The first month was perfect. She loved the character of the old house. The only weird thing was a faint scratching sound that seemed to come from inside her bedroom walls at night. She figured it was mice or squirrels. She put out traps, but they stayed empty. The scratching continued, faint and sporadic, easy to ignore. Then one night, the scratching was louder. It wasn't the frantic sound of a rodent. It was slower, more deliberate. Scrap. Pause. Scrap. It sounded exactly like a fingernail being dragged down a wooden board right inside the wall next to her bed. Annoyed and a little creeped out, she slammed her fist on the wall. "Knock it off," she yelled, feeling like an idiot for shouting at a mouse. For a moment, the scratching stopped. Then, from the other side of the wall, a voice whispered back. It was a low, dry sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It said one word, "Mine." Sarah froze, her heart hammering. The voice was deep and raspy, and it had come from inside the wall. Her rational mind scrambled for an explanation. It had to be the downstairs neighbor, the sound traveling through the vents. It had to be. Shaken, she went to the top of the stairs and listened. The house was dead silent. No lights were on under her neighbor's door. She tried to convince herself she'd imagined it, but the next night, the scratching came back, and so did the voice. This time, she didn't bang on the wall. She just lay there, stiff in the dark, listening. Scrap. Then the whisper. So close, this time, it felt like it was right next to her ear. Mine. This time, it was followed by a soft, dry laugh. Sleep was no longer an option. The scratching became a nightly ritual. She started sleeping on the couch, but she could still hear it, fainter but always there. The charming duplex now felt heavy and suffocating, and she had the constant feeling of being watched. Desperate, Sarah went to the local library to research the house's history. The librarian grew pale when Sarah mentioned the address. "The old Fincher place," she whispered. "You're not living there alone, are you, dear?" The librarian told her the story. The house was built in the late 1800s by a man named Alistair Finch. Finch was a recluse, rumored to practice the dark arts, obsessed with binding a spirit to the property, to guard it forever. He died in the house, under unfortunate circumstances. His body was supposedly found in the upstairs bedroom, his fingers worn down to the bone, the walls around him covered in deep, bloody scratches. It was a local legend, but the details sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The upstairs bedroom, the scratches. She went home that night with a new kind of terror. The house wasn't just haunted, it was occupied by something that saw her as a trespasser. That night, she was jolted from a fitful sleep on the sofa by a new sound, a soft, rhythmic thump, 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 coming from her bedroom. It sounded like someone was knocking gently on the inside of her bedroom door. She held her breath. Thump, thump, thump. Then, the doorknob started to jiggle, slowly at first, then violently, rattling in its frame. Sarah slid off the couch and crawled silently toward the front door, her eyes glued to the rattling knob of her bedroom door. Suddenly, it stopped. The house fell silent. After a minute that felt like an hour, she heard the whisper again. Not from the walls, but from directly behind the bedroom door. "You can't keep me in here," it rasped, the voice thick with amusement. "This house is mine." That was it. Sarah grabbed her keys and purse and fled, not even stopping for shoes. She drove to a 24-hour diner and sat there until sunrise, shaking. She called her landlord that morning and told him she was breaking the lease. He didn't argue. He just said, "I understand. Not everyone is suited for that place." A few days later, she came back with her dad and 2 friends to move her stuff out. They did it in broad daylight, with all the windows open and music blasting. The whole time, the place felt cold and hostile. As they carried the last box out, Sarah took one final look back at her former bedroom. For a split second, she thought she saw a figure in the shadows, a tall, gaunt man with burning eyes. She blinked, and it was gone. As she walked out the front door for the last time, she heard a final faint whisper on the wind, a possessive, triumphant sigh that seemed to say, "Once and for all, mine." This next account shows that sometimes the most terrifying views are the ones looking back at you. This story was shared by a graphic designer named Maya. She loved city living, and her apartment was on the 15th floor of a modern high-rise, a glass and steel tower with stunning skyline views. Her favorite thing was the floor-to-ceiling window in her living room, which looked directly across at the identical tower next door. For months, the apartment opposite hers was dark and empty. Maya had gotten used to the privacy. One evening, she noticed a flicker of light in the apartment across the way. A lamp was on. She smiled, thinking, finally, a new neighbor. She watched for a few moments, but no one appeared. The only sign of life was that single lamp. A few nights later, she saw something else. A figure was standing in the window of the neighboring apartment, silhouetted against the light. It was a man, perfectly still, seemingly looking directly at her. Maya felt a prickle of unease. She couldn't make out his features, but the intensity of his stillness was unnerving. She told herself he was just admiring the view. She shifted on her couch, and as she did, The figure mirrored her movement, taking one small step to the side. She froze. Was he watching her? It seemed paranoid. She got up and walked into her kitchen, staying out of sight. When she peeked back into the living room a few minutes later, the silhouette was gone. The next night, he was there again. Same spot, same unnerving stillness. This time, she decided to test it. She stood up and gave a small, tentative wave. The figure didn't wave back. He simply raised a hand and slowly pulled the blinds shut. That was more unsettling than a wave. It felt like a confirmation he knew she was watching him watch her. For the next week, his blinds stayed closed. Maya tried to forget it, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. She started closing her own blinds at night, something she'd never done before. Her sanctuary in the sky now felt like a fishbowl. One Saturday, she was coming home from the grocery store. As she waited for the elevator, a man stepped in beside her. He was tall and thin, with pale skin and eyes that seemed a little too wide. He gave her a tight, thin-lipped smile. 15, right? He asked, his voice flat. Maya nodded, surprised. That's right, you. He didn't answer. He just pressed the button for the 15th floor and stood in silence. When the doors opened, she hurried out, fumbling for her keys. Feeling his eyes on her back, she slipped inside and locked the door, her heart racing. He hadn't gotten off on her floor. Later that evening, her curiosity got the better of her. She cautiously opened her blinds a crack. The blinds on the opposite apartment were open again, and standing in the window was the silhouette. He was holding something up to his face, something that glinted in the light. Binoculars. He was watching her apartment through binoculars. And then, with a jolt of absolute horror, she realized the man in the elevator, it was him. He didn't live in her building. He had followed her. He knew which floor she lived on because he'd been watching her for weeks. He got in the elevator just to confirm which unit was hers. This changed everything. This wasn't just a creepy neighbor. This was a stalker who knew exactly where she lived. She immediately called building security and then the police. Security confirmed the apartment across the way was still vacant. It was a show unit for buyers. No one was living there. The police took her statement, but said there was little they could do without a clear threat. Maya lived in a state of high alert, her blinds always shut. Every footstep in the hall made her jump. The resolution came a week later. The management of the neighboring tower called. A real estate agent had gone to show the vacant unit and found it in disarray. There were food wrappers and a sleeping bag in the corner, but that wasn't the worst part. In the living room, facing the window, was a chair. Next to the chair was a tripod, and on the tripod was a high-powered camera with a telephoto lens aimed directly at Maya's apartment building. The police examined the camera's memory card and found thousands of photos of her floor and hundreds of high-resolution photos taken through her window, pictures of her working, eating, reading on the couch, pictures of her taken in the dark as she slept. The man was identified from security footage and was found to have a history of stalking. He was apprehended a few days later. Maya moved out within the month. She found a new place on a lower floor. To this day, she can't stand in front of a large, uncovered window at night. The view is no longer a source of beauty, but a reminder that you never truly know who might be on the other side, looking back. And finally, our last story comes from a man who learned that the most terrifying monsters are often human. This account was posted by a user named Ethan, who had just moved into a ground floor apartment in a slightly rough part of town. The price was unbeatable. The apartment was spacious, but the floor in the hallway felt soft and uneven in spots. The landlord swore it was just the subfloor settling. For a few weeks, everything was fine. Then a new sound started, a scratching coming from beneath the floorboards in the hallway, late at night. At first, he dismissed it as rats. He told the landlord, who sent an exterminator. The exterminator came and went, but the scratching continued. In fact, it got worse. It wasn't just skittering anymore. It sounded more rhythmic, deliberate. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Like something was methodically trying to claw its way through the wood right outside his bedroom door. Ethan started losing sleep, staring at his door, listening to the noise. The sound was too slow, too patient for a rat. He tried to record it, but his phone couldn't pick it up clearly. He felt like he was going crazy. One night, the scratching came with something else, a faint, low muttering. He couldn't make out words, but it was a human voice, muffled by the floor. It rose and fell, punctuated by the steady scratch, scratch, scratch. Ethan's blood turned to ice. This wasn't an animal. There was someone in the crawl space beneath his apartment. He called the police. 2 officers arrived, looking skeptical. They checked the crawl space hatch outside. It was rusted over, secured with a heavy padlock. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. They told him it was probably just the pipes, and that old buildings make weird noises. But Ethan knew as what he heard. The next day, he bought a cheap borescope camera online. When it arrived, he waited until dusk. With his heart pounding, he found the softest spot in the hallway floor. He drilled a tiny hole, just big enough for the camera. He pushed the camera through. His phone screen lit up, showing a dark, dusty crawl space. He panned the camera around. Dirt, pipes, cobwebs. He was about to pull it out, thinking the cops were right. And then he saw it. In the far corner, behind a thick pipe, was a pile of dirty rags, a makeshift bed. As the camera moved closer, the light fell on a face. A man was lying there, gaunt and pale, with matted hair and wild, dark eyes, staring directly into the camera lens. He had been watching the small point of light approach. His lips were moving, forming silent words. He was surrounded by empty food cans and plastic bottles. As the camera panned down, Ethan saw the man's hands. His fingernails were broken and bloody. In one hand, he clutched a shard of metal. He had been using it to scratch at the floor from below. Ethan ripped the camera out of the hole, his hands shaking. The man wasn't just living under his apartment. He had been trying to get in. For weeks, he'd been just inches beneath Ethan's feet, scraping away, whispering to himself. Ethan scrambled away from the hole and called 911 again, this time screaming into the phone. They came quickly. They cut the lock on the hatch. And when they shone their flashlights inside, they found him. The man didn't resist. He just lay there, blinking in the bright light, like a creature unearthed from its burrow. The investigation revealed the man was a former tenant who had been evicted years ago. Mentally unwell and homeless, he had found his way back into the building's crawl space and had been living there, undetected. The police found a diary filled with rambling entries about getting back what was his. Ethan moved out the following weekend. He now lives on the third floor of a new building with a solid concrete foundation. He knows the chances of something like that happening again are tiny, but sometimes, as he lies in bed at night, he still hears it. A faint phantom scratching from just below. If those stories weren't enough, you can find more true horror stories in the video that's on your screen right now. Thanks for watching.